Over the past 5 years or so, we've seen a marked increase in interest towards tactical first-person shooters that focus on realism and authenticity. This driving force has increased the number of developers interested in the genre, with games such as Ready or Not, Ground Branch, Squad, Hell Let Loose, and a litany of others riding this wave of success. Even massive titles like Call of Duty Modern Warfare are taking cues from Squad and Ready or Not in how weapon animations are handled and overall aesthetics. I would say games such as these inspire smaller indie studios to try their hand at making similar titles, which is a good thing for not only the players, but for the video games industry as a whole. Diversity of ideas that are brought to the market tend to bring forth new and innovative concepts. However, with the rise in popularity of these realistic FPS games, there's also been a large surge in what I'm calling a little too early access titles. These are games that are brought to the market and available to customers a little bit too soon. While early access can be a fantastic way for developers to gather feedback and funding, it often leads to a litany of issues for the end user. Early access, at its core, is meant to be a way for developers to get a broad scope of player experiences and insight about their game with what does and doesn't work, while funding future work through active purchases. Y'all remember professional game testers? I, along with every other introverted acne-addled preteen, wanted to be one. That was all the rage growing up, but now developers have scores of these game testers who now obviously lack the professional title, which allow them to identify and fix issues quickly, all while getting paid rather than paying someone else to play the game. And I like this in some capacities. Genuinely, this can make games that are still in the beginning stages of development more refined and take on a real character. But for others, it can actually spell disaster. A lot of games that start off in early access promote roadmaps or lists of future planned developments and promises, all of which can seem decently reasonable and really cool. In practice though, sometimes these studios can drop the ball harder than Dr. Disrespect fumbled his streaming career. They start off strong, promoting the items and slowly integrating all the features they had planned until one day, nothing. Radio silence. And people will press them on it. Still nothing. Take for instance, Kerbal Space Program 2. The trailer that launched for the announcement of KSP2 was freaking dope. Like, come on, man. Base building, interstellar No Man's Sky-esque travel. This was the bee's knees, my friends. And then it went into early access. Yeah, it had some bugs, and yeah, it might have been an almost cost-prohibitive $50, but the devs were putting out regular patches and staying in contact weekly with players with announcements and development updates. I mean, of course, this was KSP2. It can only get better from here. Right? Then, almost exactly a year later, things just seemed to stop. Those weekly updates and news vanished, replaced by months-long waits with quick blurbs and VFX updates. Players caught onto this pretty quickly. People on Reddit and in the Steam community boards all started asking the question, where did they go? Until one person did a little bit of snooping and found out the entire dev team was set to be laid off. And then the game died with like one more random update, but yeah, it's still dead. But that's just it. That's the gamble that we made as players, right? We knew it could all crash and burn at a moment's notice because it's listed as early access. But this is KSP we're talking about, a substantially successful space exploration game that has made its way around the world, not only into people's home gaming machines, but even into their schools to teach complex physics concepts and promote further interest in STEM fields. How could it fail? Because of early access. Do y'all remember Contain? I got pretty hyped about this because in my head I thought, oh snap dude, we're getting an Into the Radius stalker type experience. That's sick. And I know I saw a couple of people getting excited about it in the same way here on YouTube, but then early access happened. When the game first launched, everything was incredibly buggy, poorly laid out, and not well optimized at all. Both Team Red and Green alike experienced frequent crashing, graphical glitches, and subpar FPS for what their systems were. And if we hop on over to Steam DB, those issues are reflected. From a launch date of 912 players, they now have a consistent rate of only 10 to 12 players per day. That is just nuts. Contain had over 100,000 wishlists on Steam, and yet only netted 912 players, and is now down to less than 20 per day. That being said, I had a chance to play through a level or two recently, and I can say that the experience is much better now. Less graphical issues, better FPS, less janky movements, overall, just a smoother experience. Now that's not to say that the game is great, it's barely just okay. And I don't really like saying that either, because this could be a pretty solid game, but it's just not there. But Why is it now that the game is in a better shape than it started, yet there still isn't a good player base? Because of early access. People get into the game, see that the game is broken, and promptly leave. Now, is that always the case? Of course not. There can be a litany of issues behind the scenes that we're not seeing, but I do believe it's indicative of how important the user's initial interaction with the game is. And with devs thinking to themselves, well, it's early access, people will know that it's going to be buggy, and then they launch it, well, with no one's surprise, it being that buggy, even in early access, will cause people to reconsider their purchase really quick. Another example of this being Gray Zone Warfare. That started off with an insane almost 72,500 player count to now just about 4,000. That is a loss of 94%. And just take a guess at what happened there. Can you say stability issues and bugs causing a massive drop-off within the span of less than 3 months? Muy bien! This is the issue with early access. People are expecting issues on launch of early access games, but what they're not expecting is for it to be completely unplayable. And yeah, again, the point of playing EA games is to make them better and help development, but it's not to take them out of a completely broken state. But then again, some games that are launched into their 1.0 experience are absolutely anything but that. A perfect example is Ready or Not, My Beloved. When the game first released on Steam, there's about 19,600 players enjoying the messy but awesome experience of Ready or Not. By May, only 3,420 players were online. A still respectable amount, but a loss of almost 82%. And that got a little better around July of 2023 when there was an average of 6,000 players online, but then came the 1.0 release of the game. And boy howdy, Void made some sales. After the release in December, the player count skyrocketed to over 55,000 players online. But when people realized that 1.0 just meant Early Access Pro Max Elite Ultimate Edition, the player count dropped. With the SWAT AI having the mental capacity of Joe Biden and the enemy AI locked in with a bucket of meth and 45 years of weapons training, by January, the player count dropped to 25,000. Okay, I mean, to be expected, people are figuring out if the game is for them or not, but then we look at the current play count of 11,000 at the time of recording. Once again, that's an 80% drop off of players. So we're right back to where we started in terms of percentages. I mean, it's a 68% increase from early access for the base player count, but I would attribute that to the exposure the Game Awards provided. And again, there are still real and persistent issues with Ready or Not that need to be addressed even after being put into its 1.0 state. Back in my day, yes, patches and bug fixes were existent and needed to occur and sometimes brought with them new features on the date of launch for games, but that tended to be it. You walked into GameStop with 4 to 5 gift cards you saved up from your birthday and Christmas and you buy yourself that new game. It was done. It was in its completed form, the full package, and you could enjoy it without having to worry about whether the devs were still going to continue to work on it because it was already done. And yes, that was prohibitive for some indie devs that were just starting out who couldn't find themselves a spot on those elusive shelves, but I liked being able to play a game and it just be done. And I can hear it now. So what's the point? You're just ranting. Yes, I am ranting, but I'm really trying to drive home a point here. Early access has its uses and can be pivotal for developers that are just starting out or testing a new idea. And I think that's awesome. Again, diversity of ideas in the marketplace is what causes innovation to occur. But then what should we do? I'm not exactly sure. For developers, my gut instinct is to say don't launch games into early access until they're at least 75% the way done with development and with almost 95% of game-breaking bugs fixed. Now, where those percentages line up are based heavily on the game, obviously. But I think that players are infinitely more forgiving of a game that has features missing that are planned to be put in than they are of a game that won't run properly, how it's intended to, or at all. The next logical question is then how do you get your game to that state without playtesters? I would say release into limited early access like Operator did. They did so with Patreon contributions that were limited in sale. They're a pretty decent case study on this as they started off with 305 active players and had an average of 100 players on any given time as of late, which is a 67% drop, but still infinitely better than Ready or Not or Gray Zone Warfare. With that, the dev has been giving lots of updates, patches, and provided good information on the game's progress, keeping players in the loop. Having a small group of players who are dedicated to a game and interested in helping in its development with not only a financial but a temporal investment as well seems to be a pretty effective strategy. But ultimately, the solution begins with our wallets. Stop buying early access games, at least not every single one that crops up. That's why I say this issue is partially our fault, because we keep buying early access games and then when they crash and burn because people quickly lose interest in another buggy mess, another one crops up and the cycle starts again. Wait a little bit and watch the development of the early access game. Now that's hard and you may have to wait a long time, and that will put a burden on the developer as well, but again, it's better than getting into the game, realizing it doesn't work, and then just sending in a refund to Steam. As I said, early access is a good concept, but how and when it's implemented is what makes it good or bad in practice. But what do y'all think? Am I on an insane tirade, or do you feel kind of the same way? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And as always, remember our sole objectives. Stop the killing, stop the dying. I'll see y'all later.